I love reading books about places that I've been or that I'm going to. So if you look at the bookshelf behind us or throughout the rest of the bookshelves, throughout the rest of the house, you'll find that there are lots of books about Venice, for example. And, they're dated because I write the dates in the beginning of all the books that I have when I'm reading them. You can see that this was just before we went to Venice. So it was probably while we were in the planning stages, and some from afterwards and, after I'd been, and then I want to read about it because everything's so familiar. And of course, there is book after book after book about New York. There is a pile this high in the bedroom as well because I just love reading about New York, especially places again where we've been, where the streets are familiar. And so most of all, I just love reading about Melbourne because this is my hometown and I love it. And Helen Garner's Monkey Grip, which I read for the first time back when I was at school, is just incredible because you open the pages and the words jump out, and Melbourne's inner north is described so beautifully, and the places are so familiar and real, and she just writes so evocatively. I love it. I've read it dozens of times. And something more recent is The Rosie Effect, which is set in Melbourne and New York. And if Graham Simpson had have added Paris in there, this could have been quite possibly the most perfect book. But I started thinking about this because last week or the week before, I retweeted a quote that fabulous patient advocate Marie Ennis had tweeted, which was, medicine begins with storytelling. Patients tell stories to describe illness, and doctors tell stories to understand it. Now, storytelling in medicine and healthcare isn't new. It's certainly not something that's happened just since the advent of the blogosphere. It's been going around forever, and when we read about the history of diabetes, for example, we're told that the first documentation of diabetes was Egyptian hieroglyphics in 1500 BC or something, where there was a lovely reference to sweet urine. Yum. Anyway, and it then got me thinking to the first day of Friends for Life. The opening keynote address was given by Andrew Deutscher. Now, Andrew has a son with type 1 diabetes, and after his son was diagnosed, Andrew wrote this book. And it's called Typecast, and it's incredible stories about incredible people living with type 1 diabetes. And of course, I read this and it resonates, and it's familiar, but it's also different and it's challenging. And I love it because it's my story, told in different ways. And that's why I write my blog, and that's why I read blogs. It's for that exact reason. It's why on that shelf there are lots of stories about, or books about diabetes. Some of them are kind of like textbooks, and others are fabulous at giving advice. And I had to go and buy a second copy of Diabetes Burnout because my first one became so ripped and annotated and dog-eared. So this one has to be kept nice, and I really should be wearing gloves while I'm holding it so that it doesn't become the other way. And this one too, which is bright orange and fun, and you should read this. A story is what we tell ourselves to make sense of the facts. That's something that Andrew Deutscher said in his keynote address. And that's so true because facts, they're really boring. The fact of my life with diabetes is I have diabetes. There you go. What does it tell you? It tells you that my beta cells went on holidays 17 years ago and haven't come back. But it doesn't tell you anything else really. And that's why I tell stories. That's why I write my blog. That's why I tell my story at conferences. It's to try and give people an idea of what life with diabetes is really all about. It's why I read people's stories and listen to people's stories, because their stories make sense of my stories. Writing about my stories helps me make sense of my stories. So I now have a challenge to you. Still got my green bracelet on. And I'm bringing back the teapot-shaped blackboard. And I'm asking you, what's your story? And you can tell that in 140 characters or less if you wanted to tweet it, or in a couple of sentences in the comments of this blog, or you could write a post, or you could start your own blog. All sorts of things. But everybody's story is important and valuable and valued, and it will help. So I would encourage you to do that. What's your story? I'd really like to know.